But having said all that, and having gone through all the ways, all the outreach, I'll throw one last mention out before we get to it. We're also on the chat room over on zeropointradio.com. I'm in there right now, just like I'm signed in to Instant Messenger and Skype. I think I've said it before to them, but I'll say it out to everybody. I appreciate having basically ground control, if you will. Now, I always love radio because it's always kind of been a solitary thing for me. You can go in your booth and do your art and do your communication. But as this show has grown and branched out and literally spreads all around the world, which blows my mind, I hardly see anybody from the Portland Radio Authority. Never met anybody from Revere or any Mini or the other stations. But it's nice having those guys at zeropointradio.com as the ground control that, again, helps bring all this information and helps spread it all around the world. More about zeropointradio.com and an exciting live event from a man, Clyde Lewis of groundzeromedia.org, coming up at the end of this episode 171. But let's get into it. The top of MediaMonarchy.com for you right now is the triumphant return of The New World Next Week, the video series brought to you by myself and James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, giving you the weekly rundown on the stories that matter, laying out the text, and hopefully giving you the context and the subtext. And the three stories we hit this week, after a little bit of hiatus, we're going to hit these all in order. Class warfare. Hundreds protest outside banksters' houses in D.C. Voters back anti-D.C., anti-establishment candidates, and where elites meet. CFR, Trilateral, Bilderberg, G20, and more. All that and so much more is what we go over in the latest New World Next Week episode. Primarily on YouTube. Again, if you subscribe to the feeds, you'll get it all served out to whatever you need, however you need, and we're working on branching it out to some other video platforms, working on that behind the scenes. But again, so many things all coming down the pipe. And again, huge thanks to everybody who helps make this happen. I got to meet a couple of the fine folks from Free Radio Olympia Saturday. They were making a trek down to do a couple of interviews where they talked to author, researcher, and radio host Tracy Twyman. And then a couple days later, I did an interview with Tracy Twyman. It's now up. TracyTwyman.com, published late last night. I believe I'll try and serve it out to you this weekend through my feeds, where we primarily talked about FoodWorldOrder.com, one of my sister sites in the Media Monarchy Kingdom, and the attacks through the food and the overarching eugenics agenda and how it's being laid out, how it's being rolled out, how it's being dumped down our collective gullets. So again, thanks to Tracy Twyman, thanks to the folks from freeradioOlympia.org and their interview with me. Again, when that's available, I'll send it back around to you, and we'll all keep sharing all of this. So the three stories that we go over on the latest New World Next Week, and again, I'll tell you that we've been recording and streaming live video on ustream.tv/Media Monarchy. It's experimental. I'm setting it all up myself. There's little razzle-dazzle. But again, just another way to spread it out there. The New World Next Week videos, however, are quite well produced, well put together. You can show them to your most skeptical aunt or brother or whomever. I think they are probably the most effective info tool that I'm involved with. And again, huge thanks to CorbettReport.com, and thanks to all of you guys who help get this information out. So, digressions all aside, let's take it off from the Huffington Post, where they call it class warfare. Hundreds protest outside banksters' houses in D.C. Huge raucous crowds converged outside bank employees' houses last Sunday afternoon to demand banks stop lobbying against Wall Street reform. Oh, we've gotten some reform now. Bank of America, bad for America, shouted community leaders outside the House of Bank of America Deputy General Counsel Gregory Baer, B-A-E-R, and we'll note, I believe, comedian Doug Benson in talking about Bank of America. And, of course, their initials B of A. Be very of A. Continuing, the Chicago-based grassroots organization National People's Action, in coordination with the SEIU, bust in more than 700 workers from 20 states into Baer's neighborhood, one of the wealthiest corners of Washington. The action kicked off several days of protests targeting K Street for lobbyist roles in financial reform. Baer himself went unnoticed until a neighbor outed him. The mob booed loudly as he walked into his house. "I don't have time for you," he said, according to Trenda Kennedy of Springfield, Illinois, who used a bullhorn to tell the crowd about her trouble getting a mortgage modification from Baer's bank. Passersby and dog walkers smiled at the sight of people gathered all over Baer's lawn and blocking the road. Baer's neighbor from across the street won little sympathy when he angrily yelled at protesters for waking up his 2-year-old daughter. Kennedy, the aforementioned Trenda Kennedy, was one of several people who used a bullhorn to tell personal bank horror stories. Baer, formerly a senior official at the Treasury Department, is a lawyer for the bank's regulator and public policy legal group. Just another example of the revolving door between government appointee positions, generally unelected appointee positions, regardless of which phony progressive or fake conservative party, back and forth from the bank to the Treasury to the Federal Reserve to Goldman Sachs, from Halliburton to Vice President. The families, again, multi-generational serial killers. The societies, the families, the bloodlines, the round tables, the think tanks, all those. And what we're getting to, I think, in a way, is essentially the story of, if not just American history, then a lot of world history. It's the banksters versus the people, and they throw us the social football issues that we'll tug of war over, whether that's abortion or gay marriage or immigration or whatever it's going to be. Ultimately, those are things that the power elite and the oligarchs and the eugenicists don't give a damn about. They maybe threaten you with taking away something like abortion or lots of medical treatments, but again, that's all a part of the agenda. We'll touch more on that a little bit later, as of course we've got references and updates from the fine eugenicists such as Bill Gates and Ted Turner. But let's run down the list real quick of other related Econocrash updates under this class warfare posting. Dow theorist Richard Russell says, "Sell everything. You won't recognize America by the end of the year." This story from BusinessInsider.com got a lot of traction, and again, unfortunately, stories that are gloom and doom do get a lot of traction. We do need more positive result, progressive-driven ideas. And quickly down the list, Detroit to demolish 10,000 abandoned properties. Great articles from the Economic Collapse blog, the extreme frustration of unemployed Americans, the declining value of work, and 11 signs the U.S. government has become an overgrown monstrosity that almost every American is dependent upon for economic survival. Sell everything. You won't recognize America by the end of the year.